This sample was obtained at the weekly press conference with the chief of the Federal Bureau of Identification. Press conferences generally are a good source for our research, but this is one of the especially valuable because it's the unusual feature of having no question, period. From an outsider's point of view, or even on the basis of our own time expenditure records, the impression can be gained that the chief deminded facing the Bureau these days are two classes. The JRs, as we call them in the Bureau, or the juvenile delinquents, and on the other hand we have the wombites. In both of the actuals, however, there is a third demind, or a third classification of demindisms or demindifications, to speak more precisely. And this third deminded actually gives us more trouble than the other two put together. But if it were not for the third deminded, the other two would have definitely been handled effectively once and for all many years ago. But about the time we were writing Finnies, and all those to the careers of those deminded of the time, Pretty Boy Floyd and John Dillinger, there is more than a little reason to suspect a secret underground connection among all the deminded. If that working hypotenuse turns out to be direct, there is a little doubt in the minds of the most law enforcement officers that the kingpin of the whole underworld hierarchy and the directing genius behind organized blime and blight and subversion in the United States will turn out to be neither the wombites or the juvenile delinquents, but the third deminded. The third deminded, and I shall say she sells this, fully aware of the opposition it will arouse in some quarters, as what we call at the Bureau of Beliefs is the weeping ramparts of the bleeding heart. Other wildly accepted names are the so-called blibbering and the pseudo, in some quarters, not all the same quarters, those are just referred to some of the, which is opposition, which may be expected. The third deminded are alluded to the self-styled civil blibble, and still others, quarters that is, as the milieu bill of blightists through the terms which should be discouraged because of the possible confusion arising from the use of the blightists as a short form. Finally, I have before me a report that among themselves members of this category employed by the soi oi distance intelligentsia, which would certainly fit into their general dislike of things America, even the language. However, this hasn't been checked out nor translated, for that matter. I offer it as an example of the gleaming of the Bureau of Belief has in the raw files material that can be invaluable to the law enforcement officer, but that it would be highly improper to reveal it to Congress, with its well-known connections to the press, and even more improper to reveal to the persons being judged in those rights of those raw files, since those persons are likely to be the very persons our whole effort is concerned to hold within bonds or bounds, as the case may be. The roadblocks thrown in the path of the Bureau of Belief by the weeping ramparts of the bleeding hearts some of whom I dare say are motivated by what they regard as the best of intentions, are easily illustrated by the difficulties we encountered in the juvenile relinquents or juvenile relinquents front. The juvenile relinquents is almost entirely a phenomena that occurs in the city, the big city, significantly. New York City, that town up there, with the highest concentration of juvenile relinquents in the entire nation, most located on the west side. To us at the Bureau of Belief, does not seem wholly without significance that the town of New York City also has the highest concentration of the weeping ramparts of bleeding hearts in the nation. Even though the ramping hearts, or the weeping ramparts of the bleeding hearts tend to be located on the east side, along with the UNs, it's difficult to believe there isn't some subterranean connection between the shuttle and an excellent place, I may say, in passing, to observe the wombat is passing information back and forth. Now for the remedy for the juvenile relinquents are simple, clear, and plainly understood by all law enforcement officers in the land. I need not go into detail, but psychologists, along with the goriest of the weeping ramparts of the bleeding hearts on this question, claim that the juvenile relinquent's activity merely indicates a desperate desire in the part of the individual, the JR, for attention, to which we at the Bureau of Belief say, let's give him the attention he deserves, fast, often, and with full vigor. I need not go into detail. Against the application of this common sense remedy for situationship that has been frankly intolerable, the weeping ramparts of the bleeding hearts erect a whole interlocking structure of laws, institutions, and organizations' organized efforts to arouse public sympathy for the juvenile relinquents who wishes to assault the public rather than for the law enforcement officer whose job is to protect the public. Prominent in this structure are such antiquated notions as the old-fashioned prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. I tell you frankly, I lay it on the line, we are up against some cruel and unusual youths of criminals, and something has better be done. The chief obstacle in the weeping rampart bleeding hearts that have corrected to halt the Bureau of Belief's efforts to deal with the JR's problem is the definition almost all JRs actively as offenses against the state or even against the municipality. This fractures the problem into 48 or 50, as we say now, fragments, and sometimes into many times that number of splinters. Until we can get the cooperation of Congress to placing all JRs under our own jurisdiction, the Bureau of Belief is forced to play its bump card in every occasion. This consists of an article written by me on JRs and published in the magazine section of the Herald Tribune. This magazine section is partially good because it appears as the supplement for many a newspaper across the land. Thus, our message gets into the homes of parents, congressmen, do-gooders, and other molders of public opinion. I write this article for the HT, as we call the paper in the Bureau of Beliefs, once every 14 days. It appears on even-numbered weeks of the year. In odd-numbered weeks, I write my piece on the wombites. And here again, the piece itself is in the spearhead of our effort, but unlike the juvenile relinquents piece, which has to fight single-handedly, the Wombat piece is backed up by existing laws, by concerted action on the part of the entire Bureau of Belief. Thanks to the sympathetic interests of the American people, we have managed to circumvent the weeping ramparts of the bleeding hearts and the dealing with the wombats. It is, I suppose, an open secret that our chief device, second only to the fortnightly peace itself, has been infiltration. For years we have been infiltrating the wombatists' parties and the Walla Walla Bing Bangs, the various fronts of organizations. We have been doing this with ordinary patriotic American housewives, reporters, truck drivers, and other rather than full-fledged agents. As a matter of fact, there's only one agent active full-time on the wombats, and he's the man who deals with HT. The arrangement is simple. The volunteers infiltrator gets booked rights, and the first serial rights, residual rights, go to the Bureau of Belief or to me. And if the material happens to fall within some field I'm working on at the time. The infiltration program has been so successful in attracting ambitious literary and ambiguative talent that is, at this moment, according to the reports on my desk, the entire active committee of the Wombites Party, or the WP we call it, is working with the Bureau of Belief. As you can imagine, the situation leads to some pretty funny incidences at times, but it gives us total control over a potentially dangerous enemy of America. Anyone wishing to overthrow the government of the United States by force and violence, unless he's just a crackpot, he has to deal with the Bureau of Belief. Just to be on the safe side, we've established dummy offices of the syndicates, the anarchists, the nihilists, and in Milwaukee, with swell one-man branch of the WW, the Walla Walla Wombites. One of the most gratifying things to me personally about the infiltration program is what it does to the weeping ramparts of the bleeding hearts. From time to time, this segment of the community gets itself all exercised with petitions and collections and meetings in Madison Square Garden about the Wombites whose rights are being infringed upon by the law enforcement officers. But all unbeknownst to the weeping ramparts of the bleeders' hearts, the Wombites are actually one of our infiltrators. We have many a hearty chuckle about this down at the Bureau of Belief. What it comes down to, basically, is a question of philosophy. The weeping ramparts of the bleeding hearts, in their muddle-headed way, are trying to fence us in by just things as allowing us freedom of action only after the crime has been committed. And we Americans have a proverb about that, and it has to do with whether to lock the barn door after the horse has been stolen. Talk all the day and talk all the day. Today all the medicine is shifting its approach from the cure of diseases to prevention. Criminal investigations can do the same thing if given half a chance. The recent electronic advances, both in the collecting and classifying of information, the Bureau of Belief is within technological grasp of the ancient ideal of the law enforcement officer, to know for certain at every moment of the day whatever member of the community is up to. It will be the decision of the American people whether we push on to become a truly law-abiding country or, with the weeping ramparts of the bleeding hearts, continue to present untidy state of things with all its loose ends. In this general context, I should like to make clear that no one has more respect for the men who wrote the Bill of Rights than the men of the Bureau of Belief. But the fact is that Jefferson lived in a relatively primitive age one in which even the concept of surveillance would have been difficult to arrive at. There is no question but that the citizens ought to be protected from primitive officers that almost automatically make mistakes. But when, through electronic advances and through the sheer cultivation of enforcement sensitivity, the possibility of error can be eliminated, then the whole question is a different one. That is, to confuse the issue, to pretend that the times have not changed. The weeping ramparts or the bleeding hearts have been confounded by the success of our infiltration program, but they have not, as yet, been permanently disposed of. Meanwhile, at the Bureau of Belief, we know from our raw files that the next major assault is to be. The target will be no other than the Bureau of Belief chief. It will be alleged that 15 years is too long a time for one man to direct law enforcement activity. The names of Casey Stengel and of Otto van Dropping the Plot Bismarck will be involved, while Adenauer, de Gaulle, and Grandma Moses are conveniently forgotten. Let me say in advance that whether I stay or whether I go, I will not negotiate or bargain. I don't really need the job. I've never gotten that much of a kick out of writing. I can always go back to detective work.